Hello and welcome to Product Tank Cardiff 11. I'm Alex Cavell, part of the co-organising gang here at PT Cardiff. If this is your first time, welcome to Product Tank, and you're in for a bit of a treat. So for those who don't know, Product Tank is the largest product community across the world, with meetups happening in 200 countries, and we're part of the Mind the Product organisation. So those guys have a raft of training programs, a job board, events, and a podcast I'd recommend checking out. So today is World Product Day. We have, I think it's 52 events across 26 hours. So World Product Day is giving you an extra 110%. So today is our very first time. We've gone fully remote thanks to COVID-19, and we weren't sure just how many of you folks would be interested in doing this on a remote basis, but we're delighted that 200 of you have opted into joining us. So today we welcome our newest member of the Product Tank Gang, Kai Hellstrom, and we're also launching our opportunity to get together over a Zoom. I'm mindful that we haven't seen each other for weeks and weeks, and we wanted to create a safe space. It's an opportunity for us to have a chat, pick the brains of the collective community, or just have a rant. We've called it our Frothy Coffee, and the next one will be happening on Thursday, June the 4th at 11 o'clock over Zoom, and we'll be sending the link out. And when it's safe for us to meet again, we'll be organising another social evening. And I know the last one, Rowan Whittington did a sterling job. And of course, our bi-monthly events with world-class speakers. So if you haven't already, please head across to Product Tank Cardiff over on Meetup. We can also continue the conversation over on Slack on Mind the Product, as well as you can tweet at us, Product Tank CDF on Twitter. We've got two asks. So we're looking for sponsorship for Product Tank Cardiff. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen today, and you see the value in engaging in the community, come get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. And we're carving out a Q&A session after each talk. So if you've got a question, please ask in the comments below, and we'll pick up the very best ones and cover them at the end of each talk. So I'm delighted to kick off with our first speaker, Roman Pitchler. So Roman is no stranger to Product Tank. Last time he came to Cardiff to talk strategy, and this time he's talking about a topic I think is close to many of our hearts. It's dealing with difficult stakeholders. So, Roman, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'll try and share my screen. So hopefully you can all see a slide that says dealing with difficult stakeholders. That's my topic for today. I'd like to share a few tips for dealing with difficult stakeholders from a product management perspective. So when I meet somebody difficult, somebody with whose behavior I disagree or whose views I disapprove of, or who I just generally find a difficult, unlikable person, then there's usually an element of friction and conflict. Now, conflict per se is nothing bad at all. It simply happens when two or more people are in disagreement and experience a clash of interests. It may not be nice, but it's part of the human experience. We routinely experience it at work and at home. It happens. So you might ask, okay, so what's the big deal for product people then? But I think conflict and dealing with conflict constructively is a fairly big deal for us product people, as we experience a fair amount of it. And one of the reasons for that is the role that we have, the nature of our role. We have a very networked role. We interact with different and at least partially heterogeneous, diverse groups of people. So they're the users and customers, and depending on your product and the size of the market that it addresses, that might be a potentially rather heterogeneous group. And users don't always have the same wants and needs as the customers. So there might be an element of friction. And then we manage, lead the business stakeholders. So for a commercial product, those would be somebody from marketing, sales, and support, and service. And as these individuals come from different departments and have different backgrounds, they usually also have different perspectives, and different needs and interests. And again, there's an element of friction, an element of disagreement. And we work with one or more development teams. Typically, these development teams are cross-functional in nature. People have different skills and different areas of speciality, which then often leads to different opinions and viewpoints. And again, an element of disagreement and an element of conflict there. So we're in the middle. We're interacting with these different people and trying to align certainly the business stakeholders and development teams in order to progress our product and make it or keep it successful. Now, unfortunately, most of the conflicts that I've witnessed at work weren't handled particularly skillfully. Some were suppressed and ignored, and most were never properly resolved. And when that happens, then the conflicts leave behind a trail of bad feelings and mistrust. However, on the positive side, when we learn to constructively address conflict, then it can become a source of creativity and innovation for our products, and it can actually strengthen the connections we have with the stakeholders. So let's look at whoops, I'm sorry. I've just moved my mouse and it made the animation disappear. So I'll do this again. So let's look at a scenario to make the discussion of difficult stakeholders a little bit more specific. The following scenario is taken from my new book, How to Lead in Product Management, and the assumption is that the person in the scenario is a senior stakeholder. There are two people, a senior stakeholder and the person in charge of the product. So let me read it out to you. Listen, I really need you to add this feature to the release, and I'm not going to take no for an answer, says Sophie, the head of sales, as she stands in front of your desk. You can feel your shoulders tensing and your stomach tightening. There is no way that you can add more work to the development efforts. The dev team is already struggling with the current workload. But Sophie is a powerful senior manager who will not be afraid to escalate the issue. What should you do? Now, there are four common ways how we tend to respond in a situation of conflict. And unfortunately, while these strategies are common, they're usually not very helpful. And so I'd like to introduce them to you. And they're taken from a book called Say What You Mean by a gentleman called J. Oren Sofer. And the first strategy is competitive confrontation. So this means engaging in open conflict, in this case, with Sophie. So I could say, there's no way I'm going to take this, Sophie, and there's no way I can add this to this feature to the release. As you know, the team's fully loaded and the feature is not in line with the desired outcome, with the goal that we've agreed for the next 3 months. And who are you anyway? You come here and interrupt my work, and you speak to me rudely and you demand this feature. No way. Now, if this is a smart strategy, I leave that up to you to decide, given that Sophie is a powerful senior stakeholder. But that would be one option, and I've certainly seen product people use it. So competitive confrontation really means that we engage with some form of aggression or force. It means that we're trying to win and put Sophie in her place. It's also based on the assumption that we are right and Sophie's wrong, and Sophie's the one to blame. I mean, she initiated it, right? I mean, she came here and she demanded this feature. She interrupted our work and maybe spoke rudely to us. So it's all her fault. So that's competitive confrontation. That's our first option. And the second option that people often employ is passive aggression. And passive aggression is still a strategy that aims to win and in a way get the better of the other person, in this case Sophie, but in a more indirect way. You could say by employing guerrilla tactics. So we're trying to be difficult or making life difficult for Sophie. We might say, oh, Sophie, what you're asking for is going to be extremely challenging, and the development team's not going to be happy. I can't really commit to this right now. I can put it on the product backlog, but I'll have to talk to the development team first and then probably get later to you at a later stage and see what I can do here. But yeah, this is going to be extremely difficult and I'm not really happy with it. So, and then I could go to the development team and say, guess what, guys? Sophie just came and she demanded this feature, and I had to promise to her to put it on the product backlog. But don't worry, I'll deprioritize it. We'll never get to it. And then I might go and talk badly about Sophie to other product people and say, has she done this to you? Oh my God, this woman, she's just like, oh, unbelievable. This person, oh my God. So again, that sort of comes from a place that I feel I'm right, Sophie is wrong. I'd like to try and put her in a place. I'd like to try and win and get the better of her, even though it's in an indirect way. So those are two winning strategies that people commonly employ. The next two are less about winning, they're more about minimizing our losses. And the third one is called conflict avoidance. So as the name suggests, we try and avoid addressing the actual conflict. An example in this scenario would be to say, is this such a big deal? We're all grown-ups here, and Sophie's a senior stakeholder. Usually she's a reasonable person. I'm sure she's got a very good reason for requesting this feature. In fact, we can go and talk to her and find out. Why don't we try and show a positive can-do attitude? Why aren't we trying to be helpful and meet in the middle, split the difference, and try and compromise? So it's not going to be possible to fully implement this feature in the current release, but maybe we can implement part of it, maybe half or so. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit tricky talking to the development team, and might stretch them, but it might be possible. So that seems like a reasonable approach, doesn't it? And some of you may say, like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do this. Yeah, sure, of course. But I don't think it would address the actual underlying conflict. I think it would stay at the surface. When we reflect on the scenario, what happened, Sophie comes to the person in charge of the product and requests or demands a feature and expects the product person to expedite this feature and essentially say, yes, yeah, of course, I'll do it. Now, I don't think she really treats the person in charge of the product as an empowered product professional, but more like a personal assistant. So I don't think that's right. And then I would expect that in any company, there are established product management processes, and there's a way to regularly review the product strategy and the product roadmap, discuss any changes to the product roadmap, discuss any feature ideas and assess them, and see if new feature requests are helpful and help meet the agreed outcomes, the agreed goals, and create the desired value. And so I would expect that Sophie attends one of those meetings, or even better, sends one of her team members as the sales rep to the appropriate meeting. And again, by coming directly to the person in charge of the product and trying to push through her request, her feature, she doesn't really respect the processes. And again, I don't think that's appropriate behavior. And so if we now try and compromise, then we let Sophie get away with unhelpful behavior and set a precedence. And what prevents her from coming back and showing similar behavior again, or other stakeholders copying her behavior? So I don't think that would be a really good strategy either. And nor is passivity. And passivity really means saying, you know what, I don't have a choice here. What should I do? Yeah, I mean, it's unrealistic implementing this feature on top of everything else, and I'm not sure that it's really going to be beneficial for what we're trying to achieve. But hey, my hands are tied. Sophie is a senior stakeholder. I'm just a little product person. If I say no, she's going to go to my boss. My boss is going to come to me and say, like, Roman, you're going to do it. So I might as well say yes straight away. And it's going to be tough. I mean, I don't know what I should say to the development team. Maybe I can try and persuade them and tempt them with, work a few extra hours, come in at the weekend with pizza and alcohol-free beer and vanilla ice cream or something else. But yeah, I mean, I just have to say yes. And of course, that's not a great strategy either. It just means giving up my needs. And in fact, not only giving up my needs, but also kind of giving up the needs of the team and not really sticking up for the team and protecting the team in a way. So neither of those four strategies, I would argue, is truly helpful. None of those strategies helps to really address and really resolve the conflict. There's always a winner or loser. There's a blame game that's happening, that's being played. So these aren't really skillful. These aren't really helpful strategies. Now, what else can we do? Now, it turns out that the FBI experienced a similar, but admittedly much more extreme challenge. And so they've come up with a model they called the behavioral change stairway model. So imagine that you're faced with the following situation. Armed terrorists have kidnapped a group of civilians, and they're now asking for a ransom, and they're threatening to kill the hostages if their demands are not fulfilled. Now, if you grew up in the 1980s with Hollywood movies like I did, you might be tempted to say, it's easy. Send in a Rambo-like agent who can single-handedly capture the baddies and free the goodies. It turns out apparently the FBI have tried this strategy with a low success but a high death rate. So they've developed something else, and that something else is the behavioral change stairway model that I'd like to introduce to you now. And by the way, this model was made popular by the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So no matter if we're facing an armed terrorist or a difficult senior stakeholder like Sophie, what we'd like to encourage is a behavior change, a positive behavior change in the individual. So we'd like Sophie to understand that it's going to be impossible and it might be undesirable to add this feature to the current release, and that by going to the desk of the person in charge of the product and demanding this feature, so that's not an appropriate way of acting, of behaving. The trouble, of course, is that we lack transactional power as product people. We're not in a position to tell Sophie what to do, and usually we're not in a position to offer any incentives like a bonus or pay rise to any of the stakeholders. We can't assign tasks. We can't make people do things. We can't make people change their behavior. So the only option we really have in order to encourage a positive behavior change is to influence the individual. And that means really encouraging Sophie to be attentive to our perspective and needs, and follow our suggestions, and ultimately follow our leads, follow our guidance. Now, how can we influence Sophie? Well, the only way to influence Sophie is to build trust, to establish rapport, to build a trustful connection with Sophie. If Sophie doesn't trust us, she's not going to truly listen to us. She's not going to be open to our ideas. She's not going to be open to any data. We might have the best data in the world that we can show her, but if she doesn't trust us, she's not going to believe us. She's going to find ways to invalidate the data and say, like, yeah, that's your interpretation, but, or the data's not good, or, the data's not representative, or whatever. So, of course, that begs the question, how do we build trust? And a key trust-building mechanism is empathy. So the answer is by empathizing with Sophie. And empathizing with Sophie means reaching out to her with warm-heartedness, no matter if we find her a likable person or not, no matter if we agree with her behavior and her request or not. And empathy doesn't mean that we accept or approve. Empathy means that we approve or agree with. Sorry, empathy means that we accept Sophie and we accept her behavior as it is. It may not be right, it may not be helpful, it may not be good, but that's what's happening, or that's what happened. And it means cultivating a warm attitude towards her, and avoiding any form of aversion or any form of aggression towards her. But a warm-hearted, accepting attitude, that's what empathy entails. And that allows us to better understand her perspective. It better allows us to understand the emotions and feelings that are present in her, and what drives that behavior, her needs. Why is she acting that way? And a key way to cultivate empathy is to actively listen to Sophie, to make a real effort to be present and take in what she has to say. So that's the behavioral change stairway model. And it's called a stairway model as it's linear. So we have to take separate steps. We have to first practice active listening to then be able to, in order to be able to empathize with Sophie and build a trustful relationship, build a trustful connection that allows us then to influence her and in a way lead her and be able, opens her up to our perspective and our suggestions and ideas, and that then hopefully encourages a behavior change. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that Sophie will change her behavior, but I feel that models like these are our best bet as product people to constructively work with difficult people and encourage a positive change, given the options we have. Now, as active listening plays such an important part in this model, it's the first step that triggers then the rest of the process. I thought I'd share a few listening tips with you. And the first tip is to be fully present and listen attentively. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal? Yeah, listen up. So what? But I find, reflecting on my own listening habits, that I find it generally hard to give my full attention to someone and listen, being truly attentively, being present. But I think that's very helpful. It's particularly helpful in a difficult conversation or dealing with a difficult person. Why? Well, first of all, because it allows us to take everything in, but maybe more importantly, because it makes the other person feel appreciated, understood, and valued. I think as human beings, we notice if somebody is truly listening to us, or if somebody's kind of sort of, practicing sort of partial listening or selective listening, and it's maybe listening with the intention to respond and prove us wrong, rather than the intention to truly understand and engage. Now, in order to be able to be present and listen attentively, there are two things I'd like to suggest. The first one is to avoid rushing from meeting to meeting, but leave time between those sessions, particularly if the meetings are likely to be challenging or difficult. So maybe a quarter of an hour or so to be able to digest the previous meeting and get ready for the next one. And the second thing I'd like to say is don't feel forced to have a conversation, have a difficult conversation when you're not ready. So, assuming that I'm working at my desk and Sophie comes to me and she demands this feature, I might have a fairly strong emotional reaction. I might feel rather upset. I might feel irritated, or I might feel frustrated. I might feel angry. I might feel anxious, or a combination of those feelings might be present in me. Well, experience tells me that's not a good mental state for me to be in order to have a constructive, difficult conversation. So I then, try and say to Sophie, look, I'm feeling a little bit worked up right now. It's difficult. It's important for me to sort this out. Can we please have a conversation in a little while? After lunch, in the afternoon, in an hour's time, tomorrow, whenever there's an appropriate time, so that I'm able to kind of work through my emotions or let my difficult emotions subside a little bit. And my thinking, my perception, and my speech isn't influenced by them quite so strongly. And so I'm not going to say something, or I'm unlikely to say something to Sophie or say something in a way that I'll later regret and I'll have to apologize for. Usually not very helpful. The second listening tip is to be respectfully curious, suspend judgment, and cultivate an open mind. I find that as product people, we're so used to evaluate and analyze, and we're so used to having an opinion and offering an opinion, that it can be truly hard to relax and suspend that judgment, suspend that the capability, this kind of automated, this habitual way of analyzing what somebody's saying, and immediately kind of responding with our perspective and view. But I think that's a really worthwhile skill to develop in order to be able to fully understand Sophie and learn something from her. So I might initially think that what Sophie says is just wrong, and I might think that her behavior is inappropriate. But if I try and listen with an open mind, I might even possibly discover that there's some truth in what Sophie has to say. Or in fact, it might actually be the right thing to add this feature, and we may have to change the desired outcome, the goal of the release that we're working on. We may have to change some of the major features that we wanted to offer. So she might have a very good case. But if I cling too much to my preconceived notions and ideas, if I'm not open-minded, but if I'm closed-minded, I'm likely to dismiss Sophie's perspective quite easily in favor of, as I said, clinging to my ideas and kind of promoting my views and perspectives. So it's really about being receptive and developing a certain humbleness, you could say, being less judgmental and less critical. And in fact, cultivating an element of gratefulness is a great way to support this listening habit. Even if what Sophie is requesting isn't terribly helpful, even if we don't agree with it, even if the behavior isn't great, we could still be grateful for her making the effort and showing an interest in the product. So, and then the last listening tip that I'd like to share is listen not only for the facts of what is being said, but also for the feelings and the needs. Feelings typically manifest themselves in body language, so like tone and facial expressions and arm and hand movements, gestures. So if Sophie comes to my desk and she's got a red face and she talks rather loudly, then chances are that she's upset. And I think that's important to recognize. And I might even say to Sophie, "Oh, it seems to me that you're upset." That might help her. Might help her. It might put her at ease. And feelings are indicators of underlying needs. They help us discover the real reason why Sophie is requesting that feature. Why is that so important to her? Why she's making such an effort to come to my desk, interrupt my work, and talk to me about that specific feature. What's going on here? Is she trying to be? Is there personal interest? And what personal interest is that? Is it about her? Is it about her team? Is it about meeting sales bonus or sales targets for her team? What's this about? Another way to discover needs, in addition to paying attention to the feelings, is to ask open questions. So questions that typically start with why, how, or what. So could you please tell me why this feature is so important, Sophie? Or I'd really like to understand, why you think this feature would be helpful. So these are 3 listening tips. Hopefully you found them a little bit helpful. And then, in addition to active listening and cultivating empathy, there are other techniques that we can use in order to build trust. And I thought I'd share a few of these with you. So the first one is to speak and act with integrity. And again, I find looking at this superficially sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, don't tell any porcupines, don't tell any lies. Yeah, fine. That's what we're taught in kindergarten, right? But I think often really saying what is true and having the courage to do so is rather challenging. So I remember a few years back, I was working on a brand new product in the telco space, and the new product development effort wasn't going too well. And my boss was a senior employee. He'd been around for a long time. He'd seen a lot. He was very well connected, very influential. He was also quite a figure. He was quite a tall guy. He was also a little bit big, but it was like, wow, he was like quite an impressive figure. And he could be really nice. He could be quite a sweet guy, but he could also get very grumpy, very, very grumpy. And as the development effort wasn't going well, he was getting, grumpy. And so what I started to do is I started in the update meetings, sugarcoating the messages and saying, yeah, I know the latest data we have, it's not looking good. The progress isn't brilliant. However, when we put this into perspective, I don't think it's looking that bad. And I think there's a chance that blah, 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 blah. Even so deep down, I knew that, but we're just late. That's it. We were late. And in hindsight, while I didn't mean to cause any harm, my behavior probably wasn't appropriate. And I indirectly supported my boss's unhelpful behavior. It's just not right for a boss to get funny with people who simply try and communicate the truth, simply communicate what's going on. So yeah, speaking and acting with integrity can require a bit of courage, and it might also mean admitting mistakes and apologizing to people. The second trust building technique that you can use is get to know people and allow people to get to know you. A simple way to do this is to hang out, be it in the same room or online, and have a coffee together or lunch together, have chats together. We're all influenced by our backgrounds, our family situations. We're all influenced by what's going on in our life, and sharing some of that can be really helpful. A while back, I was in a meeting, and the meeting wasn't going well. And one of the attendees, who I know as a nice and reasonable person, she kept hijacking the meeting and going off on tangents, and I couldn't understand that behavior, and I got increasingly frustrated and didn't really know what to do. And so only after the meeting, when I talked to her, did I find out that she was going through a very difficult phase in her divorce. And I believe that all the emotional upset that she felt kind of caused her, at least to a certain extent, to behave in that way. Now, if I'd known this beforehand, if we'd done just a brief checking in, 5 minutes or so at the beginning of the meeting, it would have been much easier for me to relate to her and kind of put her behavior into context, and maybe even be able to say something helpful. So making time to get to know people, or reconnecting and doing a little bit of relationship building usually pays off. And then involve people in product decisions. Encourage the stakeholders to come and share their ideas and their concerns, but don't make the mistake of trying to please people or broker a compromise. Successful products aren't built on weak compromises, in my experiences, but on tough decisions. So it doesn't mean that when you involve when you involve the stakeholders in decisions and you try and practice collaborative or participatory decision making, that everybody gets what she or he wants. But it's really about leveraging the collective knowledge and creativity and making people feel valued and securing strong buy-in for the decisions that you have to take. And then be supportive and offer help whenever possible and appropriate, but don't neglect your core responsibilities and don't sacrifice sustainable pace. What I mean by this is particularly encouraging you not to fill any major gaps that you may have. So it's quite often for me that I see product people in an agile context not having a Scrum Master, or not having a Scrum Master who's sufficiently qualified or available. And then it's natural for us as product people to say, well, the development team is struggling, they're having issues, they're just not getting on, or they've got process issues, somebody will have to help them. I've got a real interest that the team's working effectively, so I'll step in and I'll try and do my best and I'll help them out. I think it's nice. It's nice to take an interest in people, and it's nice to take an interest in the process. But if we as product people try and take on additional responsibilities, then a job that already is challenging and demanding becomes even more difficult. And so then we're likely to either sacrifice core responsibilities and maybe do less or no strategizing work and product discovery work, or we become overworked and we sacrifice our well-being, and neither is desirable, really. And in addition to all that, if we permanently cover someone else's job, like the job of a non-existent Scrum Master, then we let the organization get away with an organizational impediment and kind of hold the organization back and take away the opportunity or the necessity to change and improve for the better. I mean, if my boss sees that I'm coping seemingly well without a Scrum Master, why hire one? Why bother? So sometimes, even though it may be more painful, it's better than to make the problem apparent and not do the work. And strengthen your product management expertise. It's tough or difficult for the stakeholders to trust our advice and follow our lead if they don't really believe that we have the necessary expertise. I remember talking to a product person a while back, and she was saying to me, "Oh, I wish my management would allow me to take responsibility of the strategic aspects of my product and take charge of the product roadmap." So we got talking, and after a little while, I said to her, "But you do know how to create the product roadmap, right? You're fairly comfortable doing this and choosing the right format and stuff, and you know what kind of elements a product roadmap should contain." And she looked at me slightly surprised and said, like, "Well, no, I've never done this." So I said to her, "Well, then maybe as a first step, you could consider acquiring the knowledge and acquiring the necessary skills, and maybe being proactive and showing your management that you can actually create a roadmap. Maybe you should just do it and show it to your boss, rather than waiting for your boss to come to you and ask you to do it. And I know it can be difficult for us as product people, but at the same time, by upskilling and showing the stakeholders that we know our stuff and we're being trustworthy, we empower ourselves. But I don't think that was quite the answer the product person wanted to hear. I think she wanted me to say that her management had to change, not she. Anyway, so that brings me to the end of my talk. Dealing with difficult people is part and parcel of being a product professional. That's at least my perspective. And I think it's as important as other product management work, like product road mapping and prioritizing the product backlog. So I think it'd be a mistake to say, all this people stuff, all this fluffy stuff and all this relationship building and conflicts, and oh man, yeah, I know I've got to do it, but let me first do product discovery, then I need to do product development, and anyway, I've got a product roadmap to rework, and I've got to look at the strategy, and I need to write some user stories, and I need to reprioritize the product backlog, and I need to talk to this person and that person, sort out this problem and that problem. So I think that'd be a mistake. And the reason is, just to remind you, unresolved issues, conflicts don't go away. They stay around. And if we don't address them, then they're likely to affect the relationships that we have with other people, reduce productivity, and they can impact our mental well-being. So I think it's important that we learn to address conflicts in the right way. And in fact, that together with building trust is a key leadership skill for me, that as product people we should actively develop. And they help us to strengthen the connections we have with the stakeholders. They help improve the work environment, and they help us grow as individuals and leaders. So I hope what I had to share was a little bit helpful for you. Thank you for listening. I'm very much looking forward to your questions. But if you'd like to find out more about my thoughts on product management and specifically product leadership topics, then please check out my website. And you may also be interested to take a look at my new book called How to Lead in Product Management, that shares more tips and advice on involving the stakeholders in the right way and resolving conflicts, making collaborative decisions, building trust, and all those good things. And if for whatever reason your question doesn't get answered, then please don't be shy and reach out to me. Feel free to send me your question, share your question via email. So thank you.
That's great. Well, thanks very much for that. So we've got two questions that have popped up now, which I'll dig through and pull out. It was a really great talk, and I'm sure we all know a Sophie and certainly been in that situation. So lots of great things to take away. So we'll start off with this question from Sarab, which you should see in the bottom screen. So what about radical candor methodology to tackling conflict?
Yeah, nice question. So the different models and approaches in order to resolve conflict. And it's been a while since I read the book. So, it's difficult for me to talk about the details of the approach suggested. But one of the conflict resolution models I really like, and the one that I discuss in my new book, is nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication, very similar to the behavioral change stairway model, puts the idea of empathizing with another person and building a shared perspective and understanding each other's needs and trying to collaboratively work through the issue, work through the disagreement right at the heart. So it's really like a dialogue between the two people in conflict, where it starts with sharing the perspectives and then goes on to sharing emotions and feelings. And then, what are the underlying needs and interests? Why did I respond in the way I did? Why did I say what I did? What is important to me here now? What is my needs that hasn't been met? And then, what would help me? And how can we avoid that this conflict reappears again? Well, that's something that I found very helpful, as at least, as a model to work with, and as a model that offers a framework that offers guidance. Okay.
And Nicola has asked, I think like many POs, he's been pushed by the sales team to support them in sales meetings as a technical support. puts them in an uncomfortable position. How would you deal with this?
Yeah, nice question. So I mentioned taking on the Scrum Master role, but yeah, being sort of helping out in sales or helping out in marketing, I think also common experience for us as product people. So I think for me, when I go through a similar experience, there are two things that I'd like to try and do. The first one is to find out why I'm needed and why my expertise is required. Why do I need to help? Why do I need to be involved? And then communicate that helping out is something I'm generally happy to do, but it puts an extra strain on my on me, and it's an extra demand, and it makes my life even more challenging and even more busy. And then trying to enter a dialogue and trying to understand what can we do in order to help both sides, so that I don't have to sort of help out on a continued basis because it's just too much for me. And what can I do to put the sales team in this case in a position so that they are less reliant on me and they can work in a more autonomous way. Maybe it requires an element of mentoring and coaching, of knowledge transfer. And it might be that, for an intermediate period of time or a short period of time, actually that's more work for me. But then hopefully by enabling the salesperson or the sales team, again, they won't need me, at least not as much. And that'll then ease my workload in the future. But it might also involve an element of kind of being self-disciplined and saying no in an empathic way. I sometimes, even though it can make me overworked and too busy, I can enjoy being busy, and I can enjoy being needed, and I can enjoy being in demand. And so, sometimes we loathe kind of being needed, but then at the same time, there can be an element, at least in my experience, that I also kind of enjoy it and I kind of want it, and sometimes I even crave it, and that can prevent me then from really saying no and really, saying, guys, you know enough about this now. You can do this on your own. The same is true with the development team. I see product people spoon feeding development teams in a way for an extended period of time, and sometimes simply because we enjoy the work, we enjoy the collaboration, we enjoy the connection, we enjoy being in demand. But that's not always the best thing for us, and it's not always the best thing for the development team.
Yeah. Okay. And final question. Before we move on, I think Ian Harvey's asked a great one. How would you relate this approach to drive and build psychological safety?
So psychological safety, at least the definition that I'm familiar with, means that I feel comfortable to speak my mind, and I feel comfortable to be the person that I am. So I don't really feel that I have to act in a specific way or in a artificial way, that I have to play a specific role, that I'm only allowed to say certain things, that I have to start sugarcoating my messages, along the lines of the example I shared earlier. Trust and building trust and earning people's trust, and at the same time trusting others is a key way to build psychological safety. It's not the only element, but in my mind, it's a crucial element. So, if people trust us, then they believe that we have that we act in their best interest, or certainly that we're not trying to cause them any harm in any way. And that makes people feel relaxed. That makes people feel safe, or at least, it's an important aspect of helping make people feel safe.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, some really insightful questions and some really great answers. So I know that Rowan will be sticking around, so we can pick up with any questions a little later. So what I'll do is I'll bring in David. So his mic should be on. Hey, David, how you doing?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Yeah, we're really pumped to have you speak. Do you want to kind of give us a kind of TLDR on you and an intro?
Yeah. Kind of grew up in the agile lean startup design thinking community. So spent a lot of my career at startups, and then kind of took what I learned from startups and applied it to my coaching and advising. So here to talk about the new book, talk about how to test your business ideas, and should be a good time.
Brilliant. Okay, well, look, I'll let you carry on, and we'll pick up some questions shortly. Thanks very much.
All right. So I'll share my screen here. All right. So I thought I'd just give you a little backstory about how we created the new book, and then also some of the concepts that came from testing business ideas with teams. So out here in Silicon Valley, but also with corporations all around the world. And again, most of my early professional experience was, going to school for design and then joining a startup in the .com era. So that's how I learned a lot of bad habits. I learned, we didn't call it a pivot at the time, but I learned the startup I thought was B2C ended up being B2B. So I learned the hard way. We ended up pretty well. We were acquired for 16 million, but I think I learned the hard way. It doesn't matter how beautiful something looks. Doesn't matter how polished it is. It doesn't matter if you worked all weekend on it. If the customer doesn't want it, they don't want it. And so that was pretty influential in my career. And then I kind of fast forward until now, the last 10 years, I've been basically advising and coaching companies on how to test their ideas. So some of the biggest companies in the world, but I also hang out with, Singularity University and places like that where we do accelerator work. So basically, I just wanted to give you kind of a behind the scenes view of this and how we tested the book, and also, how we work with some of the teams and how those stories became part of the book, because it's all based on, working with teams all around the world. So maybe draw a little bit for you all here. The first question is like, why write a book? And it's really kind of the wrong question to ask. Most people say, well, I'm going to write a book because it's a big fat business card I can hand out and generate work. To me, I knew if that was my driving goal behind a book, I would never finish it. And so when I was approached by Alex Osterwalder, who wrote Business Model Generation and Value Prop Design, and his new book's Invincible Company, which just came out, created the business model canvas based out of Switzerland. I realized, like, if we're going to write something together, it has to be, solving for a need, for people, and a need that we haven't been able to really scale and fulfill yet. So when I was starting to think through this, I thought, okay, so what are the traps we see, and what are the mistakes we see with companies we work with and teams we work with? And I thought I'd just kind of draw it out for you. So, first off, you kind of start with an idea, and then it's like, okay, how do I decide how to bring this thing forward? And so often I see people skew too heavily towards one side or the other. Okay, so the first side, if you talk about business design, it's like, okay, how do we ideate on, these opportunities that we could possibly, go after? How do we create like a business prototype? So that's usually, a canvas to sort of visualize what what our strategy is. And then how do we assess that strategy? And then how do we make a decision? And so if you think about business design, a lot of what you'll see is something like, the business model canvas or value proposition canvas, right? So all these tools that keep coming up time and time again, that I use as well. It's basically let's basically sketch out our strategy in a canvas or something visual, and like socialize it and kind of shape it and see what's the business opportunity. But on the other side, you still have to go test it. So what are our hypotheses? How do we run experiments to go learn about the opportunities? So is there evidence to support or, kind of disprove this? What did we learn? And then, what do we want to try? And so, coming back to decision. And so if you look at, the community on this side, it's a lot of, lean startup, which I'm a huge believer in. I've had the pleasure to work with Eric Ries in the past, and early adopter of lean startup. You don't have to convince me that it's a well needed kind of philosophy in our world. And then, a lot of design thinking can help you out here as well with regards to, kind of getting to the jobs, pains, and gains of your customer. Now, what I felt was kept happening, though, is when I was working with teams, they'd skew really heavily to one side or the other, and they weren't really doing both. So, for example, if you start on the lean startup side, you might, have some great opportunities to go after, but you don't know what the business side of that is. And so if you just keep testing, I love jobs to be done. I love the whole model of lean startup and design thinking, but if you can't find a way to sustain fulfilling that customer need, then you're going to fail. Your business opportunity is going to fail. On the other side, if you just stay in conference rooms creating canvases all day and you don't go off and test them, you're also going to fail, because you don't want to treat that exercise as like, this is fact, we're going to go execute on this and then we're going to be fine. So, before you go off and try to scale something, and everybody wants to see their numbers, kind of go up and to the right, you need to kind of go through both sides. And so that was really the driving force behind, a lot of our work together, but also, some of the content of the book was, can we help people balance both? And I felt like time and time again, we're not using both of these together enough to actually build successful businesses. So I love this quote from Theodore Levitt, which is, people don't want a 1/4 inch drill, right? They want a 1/4 inch hole. And this idea of kind of, again, jobs to be done, right, is this idea of there's a job behind what we're attempting. And there's a task, or it's functional or social or emotional, there's something we can anchor on and also contribute and generate business value. And so the idea, again, coming back to why write a book, it's really not about the book. It's about, for what job does this solve, right? And so when we think of it that way, what we ended up doing is we kind of created this, this job story for the book, which is, when I have a business idea, I want to be able to rapidly test it so that I don't build something that nobody wants. And when you think about it that way, it's like, okay, this is our guiding, kind of our North Star for everything that we put into this needs to be kind of anchored on helping our readers, basically solve for this. And we also said, okay, what else do people hire to solve for this job? And, they probably go read Lean Startup, or they read, one of Roman's books, or they read like one of Ash Mario's books, right? And these, I felt like all these books do contribute, but we felt there was a market need to really solve for, how do I connect my risk to the type of experiment that we, that we're looking to run? And so I really pulled on design thinking a lot here with regards to kind of desirable, viable, and feasible themes. There are a lot of design thinking diagrams out there, but this is the one that keeps pulling me back as something that, I first got experience through IDEO, but then you pull that thread and it's, Stanford D School and Larry Keeley and the Keeley Triangle. And then you follow that thread and it goes back to Institute of Design in Chicago. So I'm not exactly sure who coined this. I trace it back as far as I can. I've spoken to other folks about it. But it seems to hold up really well when you're talking about risk and you're talking about how do you test. So for example, the desirability aspect of this, the question always comes up is, do they? Okay, is there a market need? Do they have a problem that we can fulfill or solve for? It's very much a do they type question. With viability, the question that usually comes up is, should we? And also, obviously you have a moral compass, and this is something that has to be kind of ethical and sustainable, but, can it actually stand on its own? Are the costs greater than the revenue? Well, probably not. Is it tied to a corporate strategy? Well, if it's not, it might not get funded, right? So this idea of should we be working on this, needs to come up and needs to be addressed. And then finally, where we usually spend all our time is can we? And we still do this. It just, if I'm working with a startup or I'm working with a corporation, they've already built something and then they're scrambling to find kind of a target before they run out of funding, which is not a fun position to be in, believe me. But you kind of want to address all three. So if you go off and build something that nobody wants, it's going to fail. If you find a customer need, but you can't build it, it's going to fail. And then if you find a need and you can build it, but it doesn't have a business model, it's going to fail. So I find this time and time again, no matter what industry I'm working in, these themes keep coming up. So what we do is we take things like existing tools like the business model canvas that my co-author Alex created, and we say, look, if we layer in this kind of thinking on top of the tools we already have, can it help people? Can it help them focus and see what kind of risk they have? And in my experience, yes, it does help. And so, for example, if I'm creating a new product or a new business, I tend to, when I'm working with teams, they're like, okay, do we have a value prop and do we have a customer segment? And is our value prop connected to that segment? And if you get those wrong, you're going to really struggle long term, because it doesn't matter how much money you raise, people are going to keep churning out of your product. And then can we reach them? Can we build relationships with them? And so if you look, a lot of your early on risk is usually, not all the time, but usually around desirability. So is this something that's going to work out? Because if we get this part wrong, it's going to be really hard to succeed and kind of force something into the market. And then how do we generate revenue? Okay, so still on the front side of the canvas. And then on the backstage, what are the activities? So verbs. And what are the resources? So nouns. How much does that cost? And then who do we partner with? So I think a mistake people usually make with a tool like this is they go left to right, or at least in Western, like United States, we go left to right. And actually the partners are something I would talk about almost at the end. So, if you're going to pitch your idea to a VP, right, inside of their corporation, you would probably start with, this is what we do, and here's who we're targeting, here's how we get to them, here's how we build relationships with them, here's how we generate revenue for the company. And then backstage, here's what we need to do to make that happen. This is what it costs. So I had the luxury of actually hanging out with Alex in Switzerland for a week and talking about how this tool was made. And if you look at the early drawings, it's very much like systems thinking. So how do you deliver to your customer? This bi-directional kind of flow of building relationships. How do you generate revenue, right, from your customers? You can get your costs from activities and resources to kind of inform your costs. Oh, by the way, your costs need to be, less than your revenues, or that's a problem in the long term. And then if you partner with somebody, the activity and the resource they bring or helps you create your value prop. So if you partner with somebody, there should be a reason of why you partner with them. So I felt pretty strongly that putting this layer of thinking on top of the canvas could help us talk about risk. It could talk about how risk moves around, and it could help us kind of focus our experimentation. So what I ended up doing was kind of building on already established tools. And, I happen to partner with Alex, so that helps. But basically partnering and kind of like extending these tools to make them just even better. So basically the flow I follow is, sketch out your strategy in a canvas, write down your assumptions on stickies. So I like using colors just because it gives me kind of this another layer of information on top of it. And then the 2x2, I've kind of picked this up from Jeff and Josh, Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden, who I used to work with at NEO. They wrote Lean UX and Sense of Respond. Jeff has a new book called Forever Employable. But basically, I just kept tweaking this exercise across hundreds of teams, going, okay, I know there's something here with getting a cross-functional team together to talk about where our risk is. And sure enough, if we talk about what assumptions are we making around kind of the value prop and the customer, what assumptions are we making around our revenue and our cost, and then what assumptions are we making around kind of the backstage, can we build it? Sure enough, if you get the right people in the room, you can say, what's the most important thing out of all this where we have the least amount of evidence? And I use evidence now. I used to use known and unknown. So if you kind of look at this online, you might see older versions of that. I changed it with Alex because we felt like we get leaders in a room and they would put a sticky really confidently on the 2x2. And they would say, I was like, why is that there? I know. Well, how do you know? I just know. It's like, all right, this is not what I'm trying to accomplish. So if you put a sticky down, I go, do you have evidence? They go, well, no, I don't have any evidence. It's like, okay, so let's move this thing over. And then, so you're really focused on the things that are the most important, that you have the least amount of evidence. And then let's run experiments there because it's fun to kind of do other stuff, but if it's not addressing your risk, like why are we here? Why are we running experiments? So if you look at the flow, you write down your experiments, write down your assumptions, map them out, go run experiments that match your risk, and then come back and update this based on what you've learned. So it's very like an iterative process. Be really careful if kind of like you sketched out your canvas once and you never looked at it again. That's not a great sign. Ideally, if it's usable and providing value, you're seeing kind of the relationship between, hey, we pivoted on customer segment. What did that mean to our channels or our revenue? Or our cost, and so those things make sense in your head, up until lunchtime, and then they don't make sense again. So it's really important to get them out of your head. So what we did is we kind of cataloged 44 different experiments in the book. I built heavily off of Steve Blank's work, who also was really influential in my career, along with Eric Ries, to say, if you look at 4 Steps to Epiphany, the way Steve framed it was very much like customer discovery and customer validation. I just wanted to extend, and it's very important to me to extend beyond customer. And so what we ended up doing was like layering in this desirable, viable, feasible kind of themes and this information to get a better understanding of, okay, if I want to test out like viability or feasibility, what does that look like in discovery? Not just desirability. And so we kind of catalog those for discovery, which are more, if you think of hypotheses in there, they're more directional. It's more open-ended. Am I onto something at all? And then we have a section in validation, which is very much more like what you would hear from the lean startup community. So MVPs, minimum viable products. I tried to write a book without using that phrase. I didn't succeed, but I feel like maybe I helped, because if you look at the types I included, is like concierge and Wizard of Oz and single feature MVP and mashup. So what I attempted to do was kind of strip away all the buzzwords. The worst situation is like you're in a meeting and you're just arguing over like what MVP means. So I always try to get it to layer like lower and say, okay, what kind of experiment are we running here and what are we trying to learn? So if it's Wizard of Oz, right, you're doing this behind the scenes, like manually delivering something that they don't realize the people involved, right? If you're looking at concierge, it's like this white glove service where you deliver it to them and it's obvious that it's white glove and manual. Single feature being more of a, think of like early days Foursquare or Hotel Tonight, where it just did one thing and it did one thing really well, like just narrow the scope. And then mashup, you could really kind of attribute that to the whole no-code movement, where it's very much, hey, let's take like Airtable and Unbounce and Google Sheets and something else and like wire it all together, and it ends up being kind of a product that delivers value. So when I talk about MVPs now, I really do try to talk about, let's like just stop arguing over it. Let's just talk about the types. And these I feel pretty strongly in are the only ones I've actually seen in practice. And so just be really mindful you're not calling like everything an MVP. Let's just get to the, like, what are we really trying to do here? Okay, we're going to manually create value and send it to them. All right, well, let's just agree on that's what we're doing. So kind of to dive into a couple with you all, you take something like ads and you say, okay, what if I treated ads like an experiment? What would that look like? And, quite often I'm working with stuff where we're trying to figure out, hey, do the customers have the problem? Are they aware? And are they actively seeking a solution to that problem? And if it's the early stage product, people have the problem and they're aware, but they're not seeking a solution, you might try this push kind of tactic with your ads. A recent project I was working on, we were doing a consumer product, physical, and we would push like Facebook and Twitter ads. And it didn't work very well. We thought, oh, we can target people and push ads to them and they'll land on our page and they'll sign up. And we only had about a 1% conversion on our page. So it was unfortunate that, we're trying these like early stage tests and the ads were just not playing out and the team was ready to give up. And before we gave up, we said, what if I went online, what would I search to find this problem? And let's see if there's any trend analysis, any volume on that search. Sure enough, there was plenty of volume on the search. So instead, we did, with Google, we did search only ads. So it's basically like, not display ads, but when you type in something, you get search results in Google, but you also get ads layered in. And Google's made some changes on that UI, by the way. Like it's the ad, a kind of little superscript or whatever, is a little smaller than it used to be. So I'm not sure why they're making that decision. I guess just to get people to click ads. But we found that people, when they're in the moment seeking a solution to the problem we were trying to solve, same ads, same text, same landing page, you got 40% conversion. So it's just like this little break here in your early customer discovery of, all right, we have to test this out and put some discipline to it. Otherwise, you'll give up too early, and this team almost did that. If we hadn't ran search only ads, we would have given up on a product that they launched, like a multi-million-dollar project. So this kind of stuff, it's hard to reflect it in the books and in like online courses and everything. It's like this trial and error of scientific method. And I think there's this mythos of we try something, it's amazing success, and then we go build it. And quite often you try something, it doesn't work out well. And then you have to kind of figure out what else did you learn and is there a way forward? And it's kind of messy. But I think, putting some discipline to it and trying to get away from this kind of myth of we ran an experiment and it was a huge success. Like, it almost never happens that way. And if you look at the ad, right, it doesn't cost a whole lot. It depends on your keywords, but usually doesn't cost a whole lot. And then the evidence strength is kind of in the middle. So it's not a slam dunk, but it's better than people just talking about, yeah, sure, I'll buy that. And then they never do. And then the setup and runtime, you'll notice it doesn't take too long to set up and run. So this is kind of the taxonomy we applied to the whole library, which is how much does it cost? Does it provide any evidence? And if it's so, what on the scale of say versus do? Like 1 is yeah, sure, I'll buy your thing, which, is very weak evidence. And 5 being they're actually paying for it, So there is, think of it like currency. There's levels of, strength of evidence that we wanted to bring out. And an experiment can have multiple levels of evidence depending on what you're collecting. That landing page where you ask for an email is kind of weak because everyone give up their email. But that one where you're asking for payment information, well, it's going to be a lot stronger because I don't know if I'm giving up my payment information unless I really want, what you're offering. So another fun one is like concierge. Again, you're kind of behind the scenes creating the value manually and then delivering it. And it's obvious that there's a person involved here, right? These, they don't cost very much. It doesn't take long to run, but look at the evidence strength. I mean, you get every team I work with where we manually create the end result of the product. We learn so much. And we can take what we've learned and then inform the product design and inform the automation when we go to build it. So I think the pushback you'll get on something like this is, hey, we can't possibly waste time manually delivering it. We have to build it and scale it. It's like, well, you could instead build and scale the wrong thing, or you could actually just spend a week or two doing it manually and figure out if anyone cares. And it's not just physical, right? You can do chatbots that way. And I've done that in the past with teams. You could do AI that way, machine learning that way. Anything that's like an algorithm, you could probably fake it behind the scenes, right? I've actually helped test products at Adobe that way, where we had a designer create the movie or the image that people requested, and they thought it was software, but it was just people behind the scene creating them, right? There's all kinds of different things you can do manually to learn, and then use that to inform your product design. So I want to talk really quickly about kind of a case study in the book from Topology. It's a startup here in San Francisco where basically they have an app that scans your face, and then they give you glasses that custom fit you. So it's kind of like really precise facial measurements, and then they ship the glasses to you at home. So really interesting. They were like, how do we go test that? And they started with, really early on, like pop-up stores. So basically they temporarily rented storefronts in San Francisco and other cities. They intercepted people on the street, and they got out of the building. Basically they, found people with glasses. They asked them, do their glasses fit? Do they not? Why do they think they don't fit? They kind of led people into the store where the glasses were behind glass, like a case. They asked, if they'd let them scan their face, if they needed help. A lot of this behavioral stuff, you think about a product, it can work perfectly, but if people aren't willing to scan their face, then it's going to fail. It's like these like apps and these subscription, clothing products where you scan your body and like they send you clothes that fit. Well, if you're not willing to scan your body, you're never going to make it through that process. And that's really important to know early on. Like, do people have a barrier to doing that, And what happened was they actually ended up selling 4 pairs really early on. They weren't trying to sell. And they've got all these valuable insights from quotes from the interviews. And so they paired kind of like interviews and other things with their pop-up store, and essentially use that voice of the customer in their future experiments. So for example, their ads, their pages, their brochures, right? They used words from actual interviews. And I think so often we make this mistake where we say, well, we're not selling, or nobody's adopting this feature. We have to add this one more feature and then they'll adopt. Sometimes it's just like you're using words that your customer doesn't understand. And if you use the right voice and tone and words, then that'll help your process more than anything. So I just find that kind of taking what you've learned in experiment and then using that in a future one is it needs to happen more often. And let's not stop treating these as like one-off things we go do. Let's take the notes from our interviews and let's use them in our copy going forward. So kind of like, I'll dive in a little bit here about the book. So you can't write a book without testing it. You know, if it's about testing, you need to kind of test the book. So what we ended up doing is we went after 3 kind of personas. We went after corporate entrepreneurs, startup entrepreneurs, and solopreneurs. And I thought very strongly that there was overlap in the challenges that each of these kind of personas face. And so what we did is we created value prop canvases for each. This one's really hard, by the way, because I grew up in startups, so I haven't like grown up a consultant, right? I kind of spent almost 11 years of my career at startups. And, but still applying this to your own stuff, it's like, it feels uncomfortable. You know, it was kind of brought me back to earth of why this is so hard for people to work this way. So we mapped out like, what are their jobs? Well, you know, mapping out ideas and risk, manage work as a team. Some of the pains that came out where they don't understand the process. And if they were able to do this well, you know, they'd want to keep going and impress leadership. So it was really interesting to frame all of our readers this way. And then on the other side, hey, we're offering this kind of book and this library. Does it solve for these jobs that they're trying to do? Some of these pain relievers, do they actually address some of the pains that they have? And then our gain creators, do they help them create some of these gains? So it's much like product development, except it's treating the book as a product, right? So early on, just mapping this out, saying, hey, are we dialed in here? Are we solving for these jobs, helping relieve these pains and create these gains? And then we did the same thing for startup entrepreneurs. I won't go through all of these, but one that came out a lot with them it was scarce resources. And then this communication kept coming up. Startup founders it can be really hard for them to communicate even with their friends or colleagues or co-founders on what's inside their head. So just giving them kind of a shared language was really important. And then solopreneurs, similar, except this side hustle into a business. Like if you're doing this nights and weekends, then, you know, the pain you have, or this fear of making the jump kept coming up. They don't know when to kind of quit their job and go run with this side project. So we did all that. We went up into the mountains of Switzerland, which I have to admit, there are worse places to write a book with Alex, and we started sticky noting it out. So this seemed like a very familiar process to product people on the call here. We talked about team design, team environment. Like this really ended up being the whole team section in the book. We started sketching. So we started sketching out what the prototypes look like for each page. You'll notice here, I didn't even include text. It was kind of like, I know the traps people fall into. I'll just put placeholder lines as far as the content. The content will come later, but this conceptually is what the spread will look like. And by far, this is like a very different way to write a business book. You don't start with the content. You're starting with conceptually, what does each spread contain and how do you communicate that? And does it balance itself out? We created this thing we call a book map, or at least I call it a book map. Those of you, it'll probably look like a story map to most of you who do this in product. We laid it out, you know, like linearly this way and priority-wise this way, you know, in flow. We're like, what does this look like from a book? And this helped me much better than an outline to collaborate with my co-author, Alex, and also the lead designer, Alan, who's based out of Toronto. And so, you know, we were all distributed trying to work through this book, and having it all visual really, really helped reorder things around and see how the book was flowing. We did a lot of early content testing. I would interview early readers and ask them open-ended questions, and then affinity sort the feedback to see, are we on track? We caught a lot of really big conceptual problems with the book early on this way, because people would say, like, I just don't get this. Like, I don't understand what you're trying to communicate. This stuff's really important, but it's not there. You know, it really helped us really solve for some of these conceptual problems we had early on by testing the content. I also tested a lot of the content online. So I would use Medium. You'll notice here, I could see, if you're on Medium, you can see where people highlight. And I would get feedback like, hey, I took that thing and I forwarded it to my boss, you know, like this chief product officer or this VP of product. And, you know, this is really good for us because we don't think about experiments this way. So like testing your content in other ways before you put it in something as big as, a book. We brainstormed titles because, of course, we take stickies to the top of a mountain. So this is overlooking Lake Geneva. We're all like brainstorming different book titles. It was just a really interesting process, right, to go through. We ended up calling the book What It Does, testing business ideas. And we even tested covers. So for those of you who are like user testing kind of gurus, we uploaded all the different covers to user testing. And then I recruited all of the personas. And then we said, basically hack the kind of landing page test in user testing. And we would put up the book, just the image. And we'd say, imagine you're standing in a bookstore. Tell us what you think this book means. And I have to say, it was really hard. And we found out pretty quickly, nobody knows what these icons mean. So this one wasn't going well. Nobody understood these arrows in the testing process. It felt like it was not indicative of what we're trying to communicate. And this one I thought had no chance. Of course, won by like a 3-to-1 margin. People loved, they understood it. This little blurb tested really well in all of them, where it's kind of not like a subtitle, but it's just like lead-in text to the book. But we went through, I have all the videos of this. I still have them on my Dropbox folder. They're not in this slide deck, but I watched them all and really just tried to understand, do our comprehension test. Do people understand what we're trying to create? And yeah, we ended up with this really amazing, beautiful book. Unfortunately, we should have time boxed the testing. So in hindsight, of course, if I was coaching a team, I would tell them to do this. And of course, I forget when I'm doing it myself. But we ended up topping Amazon without an image for the cover. So that was really embarrassing. In hindsight, I would have probably time boxed that a little better so that we weren't actually topping Amazon with no cover for our book. So kind of embarrassing. And then, and so basically the whole challenge that I want to make to all of you is don't just think of experiments for user research, but really think of it from product to business and think about, hey, based on our risk, what kind of risk do we have? And can we run experiments to match that risk? Okay, that was a big point of it's still all the work I do, but it's also visualized really well in the book, is like think through how to visualize your risk and then run experiments that match your risk. And this is one of the biggest challenges I have with teams because they know how to do landing pages, they know how to do interviews, and they know how to do surveys. And other than that, I feel like the arrows they have in their quiver, they're very limited. They don't have knowledge of all the other types. So really trying to help people test and generate evidence in a way that helps them make progress is really, really the goal here. And it's always fun, people send me all these pictures of the book. It's kind of like, it's 4.5 out of 5 stars on Amazon right now. Doing really well. And I really view it as a textbook. A lot of people say, hey, this is on my cover, or this is on my desk. I flip through it when I'm stuck, or my colleague comes over and borrows it when they're looking for an experiment to run. So I feel like for solving the job so far, it feels like it's doing that pretty well. So yeah, and with that, I just want to entertain, any questions you all have, and share, stories I have or whatever is kind of on your mind.
That was spectacular. Thanks very much. Really insightful. So we've got a handful of questions. We'll kick off with this question here from Kai Hellstrom about what to do if an experiment fails.
Yeah, so it looks like finding out whether it's misunderstanding or proposed solution or both. Yeah, so what we end up doing, like if you're familiar with the strategizer method, using test cards, we'll always say, like, what are our success criteria? And that is quite often hard to define. And sometimes it takes a little digging, right? So if you're looking really simple, like we're doing a real estate landing page for rentals or something, and we need to know what is a good conversion rate for something like that. You can find that info, but it's hard. Like, you might have to go to Unbounce and look at their report where they publish some of this data. You might have to do a little bit of industry research. But I find that that is usually where people get tripped up, because they feel like if I put a number or something there and we don't hit it, I'm going to get penalized, and that's a very cultural thing. But quite often we have a ceremony after our experiments, which we call a learning ceremony, where we synthesize all the results and we take time to really discuss, hey, did we just mess up this experiment? Or did we get our success criteria really wrong? And so I was talking to Tendai Viki. He's also really, part of the product tank community, and also Mind the Product. We were in London before this whole pandemic hit together. And he said, this is very much like a social science, So I would say make space to have the conversation about after you run the experiment to really go through the results and understand them. So you might have to bring a data scientist in for that, if you don't have the right skills. And then think of it like a social science, okay? And the fact that we're trying to really learn about jobs, pains, and gains. We're trying to learn about, why people didn't convert or did convert. And so a lot of that can be kind of that parallel to social science of, do we have kind of a common understanding of, should we be confident about this or not confident moving forward? So I think that's where people get tripped up, and then they feel like if I failed, then I have to make this failure look like a success, which is a whole different conversation about culture in your organization and is it psychologically safe there?
Brilliant. Okay, and what about success metrics, and how long should you spend on experimenting?
This is a question I get a lot. I tend to start with 12 weeks, and people go, whoa, that's a really long time. Or people go, that's an incredibly short time. Like, it depends on the industry. Like, if I'm doing deep sea exploration, those people are like, there's no way we can do anything in 12 weeks. But if we're working with a B2C startup that's doing like social, they're like 12 weeks is an eternity, right? But for you, I tend to time box it at 12, just because I know if we ran an experiment a week for 12 weeks and there is nothing there, then we should seriously reconsider investing in this thing, right? A lot of the products and services I've helped test and launch in the market, we usually had a signal by 12 weeks in whether or not there was anything there. And so this comes back to my earlier comment about, I don't want teams just to kind of run one experiment and then it's an amazing success or a terrible failure and then go from there. I want them, like, as a coach, I feel like I have to always build them up. So if we ran one experiment and it failed miserably, it's like, okay, well, we have some more opportunities to try. Let's not give up after one, but also let's not go build the app after one either, because we need a little more evidence. So I like 12 weeks. And I feel like if you extrapolate that and said, if I ran 12 experiments, you probably have enough evidence to at least point you in a direction, versus just doing one and then saying, I'm going to make a big bet here. We're trying to make smaller bets and then build that up.
That makes sense. All right, that's great. And then final one from Sarab, who's asked, probably more tactical one, what to do if your product adoption fails?
Yeah, I tend to use this model that I picked up from Dave McClure, which is Pirate Metrics. So it's AARRR. That's the only way you're going to remember it. It's acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue. And I like anchoring startup, so basically your experiments on that Pirate metric model. So for example, sometimes you're saying, at the adoption stage, which I would put in activation, okay? Do we have a clear understanding what activation means? Is it, because like the mobile startups I advise out here in San Francisco, they'll be like, we're on TechCrunch and we got 1 million downloads. And I was like, but that's acquisition. That's not activation. Like, I download apps too, and I delete them right away. Like, how many are still in there? So I tend to kind of frame it that way. And then I would focus your experimentation on, hey, we got people in, but why aren't they activating? And usually what happens is the value prop was strong, but for whatever reason, your product does not convey that value prop well. It doesn't execute on it. So I won't name teams, but I've had literally teams with millions of customers, and they all churned out. Millions with an M. And it was because they had an amazing value prop. And then you got into the product and you're like, what is this? This doesn't do what this landing page said. So I feel like one of your biggest challenges in product is going to be, can I and my team really deliver on this value prop that people love? And so I like framing Pirate Metrics that way, because you don't have to work on acquisition there. You know, like people are signing up. Your problem is people aren't like actually, I mean, people are visiting, but they're not activating. So like, it's like this leaky bucket thing. You don't just keep pouring water in, right? You have to fix the hole. So once you fix that, then it's going to be a problem of like, why aren't people coming back? You know, and so your risk moves up there, and then you're going to have to go, all right, let's run experiments here to understand why people aren't coming back. And then after you figure that out, it's going to be like, why aren't they telling on their friends? And then you're going to have to figure out, okay, what is it with referral that we haven't? So it's not linear, but there's certainly a flow to it. And I think once you structure your kind of model that way, then it becomes a little clearer as far as, hey, we have something seriously wrong in adoption and what I call activation. What is it? And 9 times out of 10, it's usually a disconnect between your value prop that people love and your actual product that people feel like doesn't deliver on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, that wraps up our questions now. So I'll just bring Roman back in. And just to say a huge thank you to both of you. So if anyone's got any more questions, where can they contact you? Is there a Twitter, Medium?
For me, at David J. Blaine on Twitter is usually the best. You can also find me on precoil.com, but mostly Twitter is really where people reach out to me. And
Roman?
Sorry, I was mute here. Best website to find out more about me and contact me is go to my website, please. Sorry. There's all the Twitter and LinkedIn information and all the good stuff on there.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much again for joining us, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and that's it from us. Huge thank you for all the great questions and for attending again. We'll be posting up links to some of the videos that David mentioned, along with a link to this video. And if you need anything else, just drop us a note in the comments on Meetup, and hopefully we'll be seeing some of you at our frothy coffee on Thursday. Thanks.